So, just 7 days away from the June 3rd presidential election, we have our political correspondent Oh Soo-young in studio to discuss the latest developments. Soo-young, good to see you again.
It's always nice to see you, Tammy.
So, Soo-young, next Tuesday is the election day, but still the voting has been well underway for Koreans overseas, and we've seen the turnout, the highest turnout to date.
That's right, Tammy. So preliminary figures released by the National Election Commission on Monday show that overseas voting saw a record turnout of 79.5%. Some 205,000 people out of 258,000 who registered to cast their ballots overseas showed up at polling stations across 118 countries. It's the biggest turnout since 2012, when the country adopted absentee voting. The previous presidential election saw 71.6% and last year's general election 62.8%. Now this week, on-board voting began for 4 days starting Monday, and on Thursday, 2 days of early voting will begin domestically from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m.
So it seems the stakes are higher as we are expecting the overall turnout to be high as well. Now, that race is also getting that much tighter.
That's right, Tammy. So Korea's pollsters last week released their final figures for this election before the race happens, until voting day happens next week. And we can see that while Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung is still the clear frontrunner, the gap between him and the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo has shrunk considerably in Gallup's survey, from a 22-point margin to 10 points in just a week. So what explains the shift in numbers? Well, after a period of disillusionment caused by internal strife between Kim and PPP elders who pushed him to merge with former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, it seems now the so-called shy conservatives are getting behind him after almost 3 weeks of campaigning and his live TV debates.
If you look at the regional voter distribution released monthly by Gallup Korea, conservatives actually outnumber progressives. Given this numerical advantage, how actively conservatives are willing to vote in this election is, in my view, critically important.
Another notable trend was the Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok seeing his support jump to 10% for the first time in this race. Now, this comes after his televised debate with the top two contenders and the Democratic Labour Party's Kwon Young-go. Lee set out distinctive policies on pension reform, healthcare reform and high-tech growth for the country, which largely appeal to moderates and young voters, it seems.
Then, Soo-young, would you say people in their 20s and 30s are a major force among swing voters?
Well, Tammy, I say that's really interesting. I mean, what's been really interesting about this election is that against the backdrop of strong regionalism seen over the decades, we're seeing distinct generational differences emerge as a major factor. Those in their 40s and 50s tend to be left-leaning, while people in their 60s and 70s are traditionally conservative. But 20s and 30-somethings are much less regional or ideological.
20s and 30s generations, sort of Gen Z, they grew up in an era of low growth and housing insecurity, and also this digital automation. So they are very skeptical of grand ideological narratives, and also they have a little trust in previous generations' globalist optimism. So their politics is very fragmented, and they're grounded in their identity politics and pragmatism and their personal utility rather than collective and forced ideals.
Following the start of official campaigning and the first TV debate, support for reform's Lee Jun-seok jumped to 26%, closely behind the DP's Lee Jae-myung's 30% among those aged between 18 and 29. The PPP's Kim Moon-soo was significantly behind at 19%. Among independent voters who don't affiliate themselves with any party, preferences for the DP and reform candidates were neck and neck, while the PPP contender fell to third place.
Well, Soo-young, the last time you were in the studio, you suggested that if Lee Jun-seok has that 10% support, it's unlikely that he will merge with the PPP candidate. Is that a still valid suggestion?
Well, of course, it's a personal kind of opinion, but having met Lee Jun-seok last year and exchanging some conversation with him, it became quite clear that he felt he was very badly treated by the PPP. And his spokesperson said that they offered Lee party leadership if he merges with Kim Moon-soo, but he's already been the chairman of the PPP.
Right.
He's left, and he's not the type of person to turn back or simply play the role of a so-called casting voter. He himself has noted that his popularity has reached 10%, saying it will be his name and his party's name on the voting ballots. On Monday, he added that if the PPP wants to pressure anyone to resign, it should be their own candidate, not him. Now, polls show that more than half of his supporters do not want him to merge with the PPP, presumably because they are tired of bipartisan politics between the main right and left-leaning parties. And, well, yes, he does have a narrow chance of winning the race, but the 40-year-old it seems that he's building up a support base for the next presidential election. But again, never say never in politics. We might see the merger issue revisited in tonight's third TV debate, focusing on politics. So if Lee does change his mind, then he'll have until Wednesday before the early voting starts on Thursday.
Well, plenty of room for twists and turns, even just a week left until the election. So the TV debate tonight will be definitely interesting. Soo-young, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.